Welcome to the Anxious Child Podcast, the podcast that helps you best work with anxious kids and teens. Now, here's your host, Stephen Quinlan.
Hey everybody, today on the show we have Dana Baker-Williams. Dana is a parent coach who helps parents and families understand and navigate the challenges of parenting a child with special needs. Dana works specifically with kids who have a diagnosis of anxiety and or ADHD. She also is the mom of two amazing kids, one of whom struggled with ADHD, anxiety, and depression. She recalls vividly her feelings when she received a diagnosis for her son early on and was unsure where to go and what to do and ended up feeling very overwhelmed. Today, Dana works with parents to try and help them avoid having those same feelings and do the best that they can for their kids. Dana obviously has a lot of great personal experience to share with us today, in addition to her knowledge after going back to school around anxiety and teen anxiety in particular. There's such a great message in this episode about not getting overwhelmed and not feeling alone. So before we dive in, if you haven't checked out the Anxious Child private Facebook group, feel free to hop in there, just ask to join, and then we would love to have you be part of the community. So without further ado, here is me and the down-to-earth parent coach, Dana Baker-Williams. Enjoy. Thank you so much for being here. I have to say that first off, I love the name of your website, which is Parenting in Real Life.
Thank you.
Because it sounds so much like knowledge that is forged out of these very concrete real life experiences.
Real life battle lines.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just think there's so much value in that. And I think that sometimes there's a sense of people are getting parenting advice from somebody who maybe doesn't quite understand how that looks in real life. It's hard to
you have all the things you should
advice.
be doing, and it's super hard to do them in the middle of a tantrum or a meltdown or everyday life trying to find shoes to get them to school. Just put on the damn shoes.
Yeah,
nope,
exactly.
Nope, not supposed to yell.
Right. That's right. Yeah. And it's so easy, I think, to get down on yourself when you are inevitably a human being and those things happen.
Yeah.
That I try to say similar things to people that this is, these are goals, these are ideals. This is what we shoot for. So I'd love to hear, if you don't mind, I know, again, you have kind of your own experience of working with your own children and some of the issues that they've had. So if you want to maybe start by just kind of taking us through that journey, that would be great.
Sure. That journey is what led me to where I am.
Mm-hmm.
So I have two kids, and one of them was, when she was young, was having a lot of tantrums, and I was traveling. So I had a job as editor-in-chief at Yahoo. So I was traveling a lot for work. And when I had to stop working because I got very sick, so I had to go on disability. But my being home was a blessing because I picked my daughter up from school one day, and she was in kindergarten. And the teacher said, "Oh, I'm so glad you're here. Maybe the stomach aches will stop." And I thought, no one told me about any stomach aches. Mm-hmm. She's like, "Yeah, and headaches." I'm like, okay. So I kind of took note of that. And those did stop somewhat because I came home. So I think she was a little more secure. But there were just issues along the way. She could not handle change, change in routine, for instance. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't actually a mom with huge routines. So that wasn't that helpful for her. And then she couldn't remember phone numbers or dates. She would work in elementary school for hours at night. And I kept asking the teachers and saying, something's wrong here. And they're like, no, she's doing so well. She's great. And she's perfect in class. And well, eventually I just stopped listening to everybody else and got her tested. And she had anxiety, ADHD, and a working memory processing disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was great relief to get that information for her, because it validated that she wasn't stupid and all the rest, right? But also because we could get her the help that she needed. And that was easy to do once I got this report. But you get this report, and as a parent, it's completely overwhelming. And you're reading it thinking, I don't know where to go with this. They don't tell you. And, oh my God, is my daughter ever going to be okay?
Yeah, sure.
Well, she's fine. She still has the anxiety. I mean, she still has ADHD too, of course. And so it comes and it goes. It has harder times. Pandemic, obviously, is going to be pretty hard. But anyway, so being so alone, it felt so singular for me. And I was so alone in my not knowing what to do and overwhelm, and feeling like a bad parent, that I just thought, okay, there's nobody here for me. Who am I going to go to about this? Why aren't the resources for parents? And there just weren't. So I decided that I would try coaching and become a parent coach, and a team coach. And there weren't parent coaches when I did this. Like, I thought I made it up, but apparently now there are a million of them.
Yes, there are. So in light of not being able to find the resources for your daughter, you just decided to sort of become a resource yourself.
Exactly. So I sort of went back to school, did all the learning on everything. I took coaching classes, and I honestly learned through parenting my daughter, because as she went, I went. And so I really learned what to do and what not to do. And that was really helpful for me. I mean, she's a little bit of a guinea pig, so she likes to laugh at that. She's like, yeah, you're welcome, Mom. You have a new career. Like, yeah, thanks.
Well, it does help her out as well too, right? I mean,
it does. Yes.
Yes. So you mentioned that feeling of getting this evaluation, which on the one hand, as really, I think many people who would say if we've gotten any kind of a diagnosis, be it medical or otherwise, there's that feeling of relief of, okay, it's this. And
I'm not crazy. I'm not stupid.
Yes.
Hard thing to think internally, and then to get that validation that you're not is, I think, really great for the person.
Yeah. And then ideally, you then have a path to proceed down. Here's what we do in this situation. But you also mentioned that feeling of not really being sure what to do in that situation, even though you had the diagnosis.
Yeah.
Tell me about that a little bit.
Well, they don't. So the diagnosis gives you the information of what is wrong. What it doesn't do is tell you where to go with that information. So I didn't know about accommodations or IEPs or 504s. And I didn't know with anxiety, especially, there is no real path to go on. So I know I could get her CBT therapy, which is great, and combined with some medication, which not all parents want to do, but I'll tell you, it was life-changing for us, life-changing. And so I was able to do that, and that was a huge help. But learning how to help in an anxiety attack, how to help in a panic attack, how not to just pat them on the head and say, oh no, it's okay, right? That's not helpful to them. And the other thing you don't know is, do I then keep her away from anything that makes her anxious? Well, that's a common first step, right? You're like, oh, I don't want to put her in a situation that makes her uncomfortable or anxious. But honestly, that doesn't help them either, because she's got to go through life. And so you have to sit with it. You have to know and validate the feelings. But you don't know that as a parent being handed this diagnosis.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. it is a maze to navigate all those things that you
It is.
mentioned. I think it very much feels like if you don't literally have to go back to school, you may feel like you kind of have to go back to school.
Yeah, research is super helpful because there are so many of us who have done this before, and we do write
Yeah.
articles. Like I write about this a lot,
Mhm.
and so it's really helpful to have those resources.
Mhm.
But as a parent, it's scary. You know, it's hard to watch your child on the floor crying. It's hard to hear that you don't want to go to school and that you don't have friends. All these things that are difficult, and navigating that as a parent. Or as a person with the anxiety, obviously, is worse. But as a parent, it's hard, and there is trial and error, and things to look for, right? So if your child, you don't even necessarily know that your child is anxious. I wasn't looking for anxiety at 5 years old, right? But they absolutely have it, and it has no time or age limit on it. It starts, and you can hear it in what if questions. So when we encourage all the curiosity in our kids, but there's a time that crosses a line. So when that curiosity turns into what if this, what if that, big imaginations also come out with fears, and you don't, as a parent, necessarily know that that's what that is. Meltdowns about a change in plans. I had no idea that could be a sign of anxiety, right? Who knows?
Yeah. So is that how old your daughter was when you got the diagnosis, or how old was she?
No, she was. She was showing all the symptoms at 5.
Okay.
But she wasn't diagnosed till probably 10.
Okay. Yeah.
It took a lot of years, a lot of me banging on the teachers' doors, asking and asking and asking. And I saw therapists. I tried therapy for her when she was younger, but the person didn't catch on that was what it was. So there were a lot of wasted years.
Yeah. One of those, I think, oftentimes telltale signs is that things are so different at school than they are at home.
Absolutely.
And
they hold it together in school.
Exactly. Yeah.
They pull it together all day.
Yeah. And as a parent, that's so difficult how are you going to recognize that if you're not seeing it as much until you have those? It's so often that I hear that it's like a passing comment from a teacher, well, geez, the stomach aches. And you're like, well, what? Huh? Like, never even heard of that before. And that's oftentimes the first clue that there's even something going on at all.
Absolutely. Headaches, stomach aches, desire not to go to school, not being able to sleep at night. So again, there was a time she couldn't sleep in her own room by herself. She couldn't be by herself. Well, we and the therapist she was seeing thought that was a sleep issue, right? It wasn't. It was a separation anxiety issue. But again, it's nighttime. You're thinking fears of, the guy under the bed or in the closet, and you're not tying that necessarily to actual anxiety disorder.
Yeah. The other part of it too is that it can sometimes be a somewhat subtle distinction between, as you said, those typical curious questions that kids are, and they're so cute sometimes too, and stuff that you've never thought of before. And why do the butterflies' wings have that color on them or something?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
how does that airplane stay in the sky? That's a good question.
I don't know what parents did before Google, but I'm sure they just sort of made stuff up. But there comes a point where it crosses over into that obsessive kind of place, and that sometimes can be obvious and sometimes is not.
No. And if you're a new parent, all these things are signs of toddlers and children. I think kids have meltdowns. Kids have
I've got a kid on my hands here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's tough to know.
Yeah. So when you work with people and with parents, and you presumably sort of arm them with that information that you mentioned, the 504s, the IEPs, the accommodations, all of these things. what do you do when addressing those feelings of feeling overwhelmed and or feeling like you're not a good parent, like you had mentioned before? How do you work with
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, that's a real issue. And what I try to do is, it's sort of a mindset shift. And even with the teens that I work with who are the ones with anxiety or ADHD, you sort of have to start with a mindset that as a parent, everything you're doing is okay. You're doing the best that you can.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true for all of us. We all want to do everything we can for our kids. So then it's just taking a step back, doing some anxiety, breathing works, and, giving them tips and tools to use, but it's also talking them through how you can help the next time. So let's say, your daughter is screaming and crying, and you either yell at her or you say, "Oh, it's fine, it's just your imagination." Okay, well, that's actually not the best answer. So here's some other answers you could try, right? You can kind of give them scripts and ideas and walk them through different scenarios that they might find at home and how to then act within those scenarios. Or, the other thing that I'm available by text. So there are times, I'll get a text from someone so that I can answer them right there, right in the moment. I can find out what's wrong. How can I help?
A lifeline of sorts. I'm sure that's very helpful.
Yeah, I'm like a parent in a pocket.
Yeah, that's great. See, that's another great name. I feel like you're really good with covering.
Yeah, I should have done that one.
Right? This is like a whole other business you have here. You said in one of your videos too that I saw that one of the most important things that you can do as a parent is also to make sure that you have your own anxiety in check
Under
and
control,
and to be that safe haven for your child.
Yeah, you sort of, when your kid's at her worst, you kind of have to be at your best, and that's tough as a parent. It's hard to do that in the middle of a tantrum.
Yeah.
But that's when they need you the most,
right?
And you can be their calm. So one of the things with my daughter, I am sort of a lifeline for her. So when she was in the middle of it, when they're young, they're scared by their own emotions. They don't know what these emotions are. So they're tantruming around, and you're just getting mad at them because you're like, well, control yourself, but they can't control themselves and they're afraid. So if you can hold them and lean into it, if nothing else, they feel more secure, but also the actual heartbeats, theirs will slow down to match yours. So that's a physical way to calm them down if you're with them. And that's really helpful. But it can be hard to keep that in your mind when you're in the middle of it.
Sure. Yeah. Again, all these things are ideals, right? And you sort of
absolutely
maybe you remember them one time and maybe you don't.
Exactly.
But you can try. I think the breathing too is something else that you had talked about, that if you're that close to somebody, naturally, your bodies tend to sort of go at the same pace. So
right, they'll mirror each other. And so that's a really helpful way to do it if you need something quick. And the other thing is you'll learn what works for your child, right? Anxiety isn't a one size fits all at all. And there are all these different types of anxiety. And how your child or teen, right, which shift as they get older, what helps them. And you kind of need to find that. And that will be a little bit of trial and error.
Yeah, that's an important point, because back to what you were saying earlier about people feeling like they're screwing this whole thing up and they're the worst parent ever. If you get advice from somebody, and maybe they're a professional or maybe they're not, and you try it and it doesn't work, the tendency is to think, well, I did that wrong. Maybe not, that doesn't work for my kid. Let me try something else.
Right. Yeah. You want to follow all the rules because someone else has told you how to handle it. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. And you will definitely find your own little things. I mean, I had small things for my kids when they were in cranky moods or whatever. First of all, feed them if they're cranky.
Yes.
Even if they say they're not hungry. And then I had a silly little thing where I would say they'd stand up and I'd hold my hand on their head and turn them around 3 times. And that would be an adjustment of their mood, because you shift the body, or you shift the mood, or you shift the brain, right? And they're all connected. So that was a silly little thing that I did, but it worked while they were young.
Yeah.
And heck, I'll do it now sometimes.
Why not? Yeah. And if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? I mean, if it's working for you, like,
yeah. And if it makes them laugh, which gets them out of the,
yes,
the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. One of the other things you talk about is positive parenting. Could you talk to me a little bit about that and then explain what that is?
Yeah, it's coming from, really is what it sounds like, coming from a place of positivity. So kids with anxiety or kids with ADHD, I mean, obviously, I suppose for any kid, but them in particular, they get so much negative reinforcement.
Yeah.
That they're told a million times more than a neurotypical child what's wrong with them, or that there's a problem, right? So with positive parenting, you focus on the good, and that's one of the things I think is so important. And the mind shift I was talking about in mindset is that there are things that are problems for being anxious or having ADHD, for sure. It's hard, but there's also good stuff that comes out of it. You learn to adapt, you get coping mechanisms, you have, you're usually super loyal and affectionate, and big imagination, and big emotions go good and big emotions go bad. So trying to find those good things and teach them to the kids, show them, so that they also have a positive mindset. And then from there, you work on those strengths. And you always come from that. So instead of taking things away, for instance, when you're disciplining, maybe you use a reward system instead. If then. So if you turn in all your homework today, then you can have 30 minutes of screen time, a candy bar, whatever it is. And you keep that in a positive light. And if somebody's making a mistake, instead of saying, oh, you're such an idiot, or, oh, you're really bad, you could have done this in this way, and that would have been better. Just keeping things positive and supportive and in a brighter light, so that negativity doesn't spiral. That's the hard part with when you get into a mode where you're angry and you're expressing that in a way that isn't great. It's a spiral. Like, it just goes downhill, because they will then respond the same way. And then you get a family dynamic that's hard to get out of.
Yeah. I heard a statistic one time, I can't remember where from or how much validity there actually is to this, other than it seemed to resonate with me. But it was something like 80% of the messages that are given to kids throughout the day are negative ones.
Right.
Don't do this. Don't do that. No, no, no. Stop this. Stop that.
Instead of let's do this. Let's.
Right. Yeah. It's so much more effective. It's sort of a distraction technique too. This works especially well, I think, with smaller kids, but like, look at that over there.
Right. Shiny object.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, check that out. And then it's, okay, we'll go over there. So I've just always remembered that, and tried to be more positive in that way. Try being the operative word again. The other thing I was thinking when you were talking is, and I know this is true, especially for kids who have ADHD, is that they respond really well to reward-based systems.
Absolutely. Much more so even than neurotypical kids.
Right. Exactly.
But all kids respond to rewards probably more than consequences, right? So if you can have that thought, or if you're trying to get your kid to clean up their room, how many minutes can you do this in? Or let's take 5 minutes and see what we can do. And make something a game, gamify anything, especially when they're little. Yep. Not so much when they're teens, but no. But rewards are good when they're teens.
Sure. Yeah. They're just different rewards.
Just different rewards. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I love that there's that same kind of sense of playfulness there too. It reminds me when you were talking about sort of the putting the finger over their head and having them spin around, and it's just kind of this silly thing, and it takes all of the charged feelings out of the situation for them and for you at the same time.
Right. It de-escalates much quicker than, instead of escalating it, because you're feeding off of each other's emotions, right?
Yeah.
And learning as a parent, making sure you can check, is that my emotion or am I taking on somebody else's emotion? And am I angry for real, or am I angry because I feel like I'm supposed to be because my parents raised me that way or something, right? So kind of really having a set knowledge of yourself, which changes and grows. Obviously, it's not like you know everything about yourself. I hope we all change.
Yeah.
But that's really helpful too.
Yeah. And I think there can sometimes be a sense of this is just what I'm supposed to do as a parent, which especially if you're a very new parent, you have this idea in your head of this is how things are supposed to go. And gosh darn it, they're going to go that way.
Damn it. You're going to have fun.
Exactly right. Yes. And, you learn or maybe don't learn very quickly that that doesn't work. And you have to just let a lot of things go, which I feel like sometimes when we look at things like a birth order of siblings and, you get around to sort of number 2 or number 3, number 4, especially when you get to that point.
They're raised totally differently.
Oh, yeah. All bets
you're
are
doing
off.
the same thing, but you're not.
You're not. Yeah. And you just edge more towards sort of some kind of survival mode than this rigid, like, this is how things are going to be, damn it. And
right.
that's it.
Right. Yeah. You're letting go with kids. You're also letting go for yourself a little bit, right? You're giving yourself that grace as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a parallel process there. Can you talk a little bit about what you were saying earlier with anxiety and finding out when you should try to avoid things or should you avoid things, and how much do you push through? How much do you skirt around? What do you do there?
Yeah, that's a hard one, honestly. Because again, every parent and every child is different. It depends, but in general, the instinct is to keep them away from what they fear, right? So for me, my daughter was terrified of dogs. Terrified. And there was no reason for it that I could see. And so at first, if we were out on a walk and I saw a dog, you'd probably move her along to somewhere else. But then that just enforces that, oh yes, you should be afraid of dogs. So instead, we slowly introduced her to a dog, a small dog that my neighbor had. And, through piecemeal, you try. And now she adores dogs and loves them to death. But it is important to not just give in and keep them from it, because that reinforces that fear, and it reinforces that feeling that you can't possibly do this, right? So you want to give your children the belief in themselves, as well as letting them know how much you believe in them. And validation is so critical as a parent, whether it's anxiety, ADHD, anybody, a teenager, right? So you agree with them to say, I see that you feel that way. Oh, you're really afraid of this. What can I do to help you? As opposed to, yes, you're right to be afraid of this. Or yes, I'm going to check all the monsters because there might be monsters here. Right. So validating doesn't mean agreeing. It means saying, I hear you and I see you, because then they feel much more A, safe, and B, heard. And when they're heard, it builds a trust, so that when you are asking them to try something new that they don't necessarily want to do or they're afraid of, they have that trust is going both directions. And I think that's really important. And that's important all through, certainly high school, all the years. That trust has to go both ways. And I think that's not something we think about that often.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think as you're saying, that becomes even more important as they start to get into those teenage years. And I know you do a lot of work specifically with teens.
Yeah.
And it's something I find myself saying a lot to parents about the importance of that relationship with them, that you try to keep that, first of all, as open channel of communication as possible.
Yes.
And secondly, that it's genuine. If you try to BS the teens, that's not going to
No.
work.
Believe me, they're going to BS you right back, and you'll probably miss
Exactly.
it.
Well, right. Yeah. Well, in a way, and I mean, and that's what you're back to what you were saying. You're showing that that's the communication is like, so I'm sort of a hypocrite with this stuff. So I tell you not to do these things, and here I am doing them
I'm
all the
doing it.
time. So they're like, okay, well, I'll pretend that I'm not doing these things and I'll go do all this. So it's just
Right. So you have to be honest both directions. You have to, that's how you get a connection, right? That's how they're
Mhm.
going to trust you all through their lives. That's why they'll tell you, I can't drive home, I'm drunk,
Yes.
right? You need to know all those things, or if they're scared at school, or if they're being bullied, or if they're, all of that communication and that anxiety that they're afraid is going to happen in a social situation, for instance. If you have the communication, you can also talk her through it before she goes. So if you know that she's anxious about something, you can kind of just walk through, okay, this is what's going to happen. How could you handle that? How could you handle that? I know you're anxious, but you also want to go to this party, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's all about leading them through it. And the other thing is with emotions, and especially anxiety, you can't pretend it's not there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can push through it, and that's great if you can do that. But part of it is knowing what you're feeling. And so to be able to know it and name it, you need to sit with it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's uncomfortable. But if we don't learn to sit with our feelings, then we just kind of brush them away, and then we lose touch with them. So you may not then even know that you're feeling anxious. You could, could be mad. Like, let's say you're a parent and your kid trips and you yell at them. Well, they're going to hear, oh, you're mad at me. I'm not mad at you. I'm worried about you. But that's not what comes out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really true with anxiety too, is you want them not to be afraid. Don't be silly. You're fine.
Right.
That doesn't help them, because then they feel discounted.
Yes. And you're then afraid of the anxiety itself.
Right.
It's
and
also,
that actually, great point. So anxiety, that is one thing. Sorry to interrupt on that.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Is that sometimes after an anxiety attack or a panic attack, they're almost more afraid, because they're now afraid of whatever it was that made them anxious. And they're afraid, oh my God, I might have a panic attack in public.
Mm-hmm.
What if I get a panic attack? And then you've added up, they have this whole other layer of anxiety that wasn't there before. So another tool that you can give them certainly is letting them know what helps them, and in the moment that, oh, you've been through this before, remember this, and you came out of it fine, so you'll get through this one too. Keep reminding them of that, because it is you're really afraid of that too, because you don't want to be in public having a meltdown.
Yeah, of course. And that's back to what you were saying earlier, that power of naming things as well. That just takes a lot of the power right out of that. Oh, it's anxiety. We have this diagnosis. We know that it's this. Okay, it's not some mysterious, nebulous thing that nobody has any idea what it is.
Right.
It's just this, and it's okay that it's here. And it's such a great point that you were making, that there's also sometimes a traumatic response that can occur, especially after, when you're talking about something like a panic attack, which is a horrific experience.
Horrible.
As soon as you are in a similar situation with the same people, any of those kind of things, there's some alarm bells start going off of, I remember what that was like, and I don't want to go through that again.
Right.
So you're working with that on one level, and then also even neurologically, once those neurons and chemicals have gone off in the way that they have,
Triggered. Yep.
you're much more likely to have that happen again.
Exactly. So then it's making use of remembering that, yes, you feel like you're dying, your heart is pounding and you're sweating, but but you're not dying. So this is anxiety. This is what you have. You know what it is. Here's what helps you. And, give them some tools to work with, like, grounding, or 5 senses. What are you seeing? What are you feeling? What are you hearing? What are you tasting? What are you smelling? And that brings them back into the present.
Yeah, that's a great one. I wonder how many ER doctors or nurses or whatever, like what they would say if you asked, how many people with panic attacks do you get in here every night?
I bet a lot.
Yep.
A lot.
Yeah.
Because it's scary. And
yeah,
it's real. And that's the key thing I tell the parents.
Yeah.
Really key is, this is real. Accept it as real, because otherwise, if you're discounting it, you're toast, right? There's nowhere good to go with that.
Mhm.
So you need to, it's, even if it's just in the mind, that affects your whole body, and those manifestations are real. So when they have a stomach ache and you say, well, go to school, you're fine, you're faking it. You're not faking it. It's a real stomach ache. They may not be sick, but they have anxiety. It's a real stomach ache. And that's, for a lot of my clients, that's a aha moment. And so, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. And I feel that's so common too, to think that they're trying to pull a fast one or get away with something, or it's, the kid who, I always think of the kid in E.T. who holds his thermometer up to the light bulb to make the, so then they come in and he's like,
when I'm under hot water, I'm really sick.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't do that, by the way, because the thermometer can explode.
But don't try this at home.
Yeah, exactly. But it's not that. It's, as you said, it's like this is happening. All those things that are taking place in your brain are exactly the same things that would happen if somebody was robbing the house, or there was a bear.
It's that fight or flight, and that's real, and you get frozen.
Yep. And we wouldn't discount that.
No.
Yeah.
No, really important.
So what's the central message that you want people to take away from this? Is there something that you feel like you tell parents that is maybe of utmost importance, or something we haven't covered?
I think the most important thing, well, there are a couple, but the most is validate them. Validate their feelings. Validate them. Build that trust. And trust them that what they're going through is real. And accept that, because they're dealing with enough, and putting your own emotions on top of it doesn't help, and it doesn't help your connection. So I think if you can connect first, whether that means they're tantruming and you hold them, whether it means they're a teenager and you're just validating what they're feeling, and also hold space for them, but also hold space for yourself, because there is no rule book. We're all doing the best that we can, and all you can do is love them and show up. And that's the most important thing. Show up every day. You may show up in a bad way one day, it may not be a positive situation, but that's okay. You have a whole lifetime. You're building adults. And so I think it's really important to have that connection, and to get that, I think you need to validate them. You need to hear them, and you need to educate yourself on what anxiety is, what is ADHD, what does it do to your body, what does it do in your brain, because you do parent differently for a different type of brain. You use rewards. You don't use taking away your phone, because that doesn't really work.
Right.
Motivations are different. So you need to kind of learn what works for your child and what works for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And I think there's we've come kind of across this point a few times as we've been talking. There's always that parallel process there. As you said, you're showing up for them, but you're also showing up for yourself. And you can't do all of these things for your child if you're not doing things for yourself at the same time.
Right. Yeah. And it's important to give yourself that grace and that humility, and be honest. If you mess up with your kid, just like you want them to say, I'm sorry, you can just apologize.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. So they're people. even if they're really, really little, they're people. And I think that if you can keep that in your head, that, your little one is actually, okay, maybe they're just in a bad mood. You have bad moods. Why wouldn't they have bad moods, right? It's just, it's that connection first, I think. Connect first, and then go with the emotions after that.
I love it. So tell me a little bit about your website and sort of what people can expect on there. I mean, I love it. I checked it out already myself. There's a whole bunch of blog posts and videos and some really great stuff on there.
I do write. I'm a writer, so I also write for magazines and websites. So I do have a blog, and
that's why your writing is so good. Okay, now it all makes sense.
Yeah, my previous career
was that okay? So that was the Yahoo
content.
Thing. Okay, yeah.
So I do that. So I'll write for Attitude, which is a great. For ADHD, Attitude and Chat are great organizations. My website. You can also see, so there's all sorts of articles. Some are on anxiety, some are on ADHD, some are just parenting, back to school, college, high school, kids, tantrums, all of it. And you can make an appointment with me, a free 30 minutes. I'll talk to you, see if there's a fit, see if I can just help you, right? If you're struggling, don't feel that you're alone, because the whole reason I'm here is so nobody feels alone.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for what you're doing for people. I think that is such a powerful thing for people to feel like they're not going at this by themselves, which of course, I mean, if you think about it rationally, there are many, many parents all over the place.
Yeah, you know that in your head.
Right.
But again, emotions sometimes overcome that brain.
Exactly. Yes. And it just feels that way. And it's not a great feeling. And when you feel helpless, I think you lose that sense of agency as well. And you just feel like there's nothing that you can do. And that's not a good place.
No, it's not. And overwhelm is hard. And so, and here's the thing. It's pretty easy to make a few shifts in how you think and how you choose to respond instead of react as a parent, that could make a really big difference at home. Really small shifts, which is so when I work with teenagers or kids or young adults, it takes longer to make new habits and everything. So I, tend to see them for longer. But parents, it can be some pretty quick shifts that will change your family dynamic. And that's so huge, because family dynamics, when you're raising a child with anxiety or ADHD or any issues, it's hard.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard. And I think small shifts can make big differences. And if you believe that, I think, and are open to that, you'd be surprised how well it can work for your family and the change.
Yeah. And that takes away that sense of feeling overwhelmed. If you feel like, okay, there are these manageable things that I can do, these small steps that are pretty big bang for your buck. Like you can do these sort of small little things and see these big measurable differences. Makes it that much easier to kind of get started on that journey to doing that.
Absolutely. And they can be as little as making anything a game or a competition. Right. Switch it up a little bit. Yeah. Maybe play music and have a dance party for 1 minute, when you're in the middle of a fight. Just try to find your own little things that will lighten the mood and bring back some positivity, because then you de-escalate and everybody can take a breath. And breathing's good.
Breathing is good.
Breathing is good.
Yes. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, it was great talking to you. Thanks.
All right. That was Dana Baker Williams. Her website is parentinginreallife.org, and you can reach out to her there. As always, if you're listening to the show and you want to get in touch, please don't hesitate to do so. You can do that on Instagram, Facebook, or the website, theanxiouschildpodcast.com. So that is it for today. And until next time, be well and be in touch.
This podcast is not intended as medical or psychological treatment. In no way should it replace treatment from a mental health professional.